Blood streaked the horizon as Reese Faulkner spotted two motionless figures beside the railroad tracks, their wrists bound with heavy iron chains that glinted cruelly in the dying light. His horse nickered nervously, sensing something was wrong before they'd even approached the scene. Reese's hand instinctively moved to the Colt revolver at his hip, scanning the surrounding scrubland for signs of ambush. It was 1875, and the stretch of New Mexico territory between Santa Fe and Albuquerque had become increasingly dangerous as the railroad pushed westward. Outlaws preyed on travelers, railroad workers disappeared, and the local lawmen seemed more interested in collecting bribes than keeping peace. None of that prepared Reese for what he found as he cautiously approached. Two young women, sisters by their similar features, huddled together against a wooden railroad tie. Their dresses were torn, faces streaked with dust and tears. One appeared unconscious, her head resting on the other's shoulder. The conscious sister looked up at him with a mixture of terror and desperate hope. "Please," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "Help us." Reese dismounted, his boots kicking up dust as he knelt before them. The chains were secured with heavy padlocks, the links already chafing angry red marks into their wrists. He'd seen many terrible things in his 30 years, but the deliberate cruelty of leaving these women to die slowly in the desert heat kindled a rage within him. "Who did this to you?" he asked, already reaching for the metal cutters he carried in his saddlebag. He never traveled without tools. The frontier demanded preparedness. "Thornton's men," the woman replied, watching his hands as he retrieved the cutters. "They took everything, said we were payment for our father's debts." Reese knew of Clayton Thornton, a cattle baron who ruled the territory like a feudal lord. Men who crossed him had a habit of disappearing, and women. Reese pushed the thought away, focusing instead on the heavy iron between the cutting blades. With several powerful squeezes, the chains broke apart. He did the same for the unconscious sister, noting with concern the bruises visible on her neck and arms. "What's your name?" he asked as he worked. "Nora Kincaid," she answered, rubbing her freed wrists. "This is my sister Maggie. Our father had a small ranch north of here until—" Her voice faltered. Reese heard what she didn't say. Thornton had probably taken their land, their home, and then decided the daughters were additional compensation. It wasn't the first time he'd heard such a story. Once both women were freed, Reese stood and extended his hand to Nora. "Come with me," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "Those men might return and you need water and rest." Nora hesitated only a moment before taking his hand, her fingers trembling against his calloused palm. "Why would you help us? You don't know us." Reese helped her to her feet. "Out here, helping strangers isn't kindness, it's survival." He glanced toward the empty horizon. "Besides, some things are just plain wrong, no matter how you look at them." He lifted the still unconscious Maggie onto his horse, then helped Nora mount behind her sister. As the sun dipped below the distant mountains, casting long shadows across the desert, Reese took the reins and began leading them toward his cabin 10 miles north. "I have a place," he explained, walking steadily beside the horse. "It's not much, but you'll be safe there tonight. Tomorrow, we can figure out what's next." As they moved away from the tracks, Reese spotted dust on the horizon to the south. Riders, moving fast. Whether Thornton's men or just travelers, he couldn't risk finding out. "We need to move quicker," he said, and Nora nodded, one arm tight around her sister's waist to keep her secure in the saddle. Under the emerging stars of the New Mexico night, they vanished into the rugged landscape. A cowboy and two sisters fleeing toward an uncertain tomorrow. They reached Reese's cabin well after midnight. The small structure sat nestled against the base of a rocky hill, partially hidden by juniper trees. A creek ran nearby, providing precious water in the arid landscape. Reese had built the place himself 3 years earlier, after leaving behind a life he rarely spoke about. "It's not much," he said as he helped Nora down from the horse. Maggie had regained consciousness during their journey but remained disoriented and weak. "It's shelter," Nora replied, supporting her sister with surprising strength for her slender frame. "That's more than we had hours ago." Inside, the cabin was simple but tidy. A stone fireplace dominated one wall with a small kitchen area beside it. A table with 2 chairs stood in the center, and a narrow bed occupied the far corner. Shelves lined the walls, holding books that seemed incongruous with the rustic surroundings. Reese quickly built a fire while Nora helped Maggie to the bed. In the improved light, he could better see the sisters. Both had the same chestnut hair, though Nora's fell in loose waves while Maggie's was straight. Their features hinted at Irish ancestry: fair skin, now marred with scrapes and dirt, and Nora's eyes were a striking green that caught the firelight. "I'll sleep outside," Reese said, filling a kettle with water from a barrel near the door. "You two take the bed." "You don't have to," Nora started. "I do," he interrupted gently. "You're safe here, Miss Kincaid, I promise you that." While the water heated, Reese found clean cloths and a small jar of salve he'd made from local plants. He'd learned medicine from an old Apache woman who'd saved his life years before. He handed these to Nora, along with a worn nightshirt. "For your sister's wounds," he explained. "And something clean to wear. I'll step out while you tend to her." On the small porch, Reese leaned against the railing and stared into the darkness, taking in the sisters' complicated things. Thornton wasn't a man who let anything go, especially something he considered his property. The thought made Reese's jaw clench. People weren't property, no matter what debts their father might have owed. When Nora called him back inside, he found Maggie clean-faced and sleeping in his bed, her breathing now steady. Nora looked exhausted but relieved. "She'll be all right," Reese said, noting the proper application of the salve on the visible wounds. "You have a healer's touch." "Our mother taught us," Nora said softly, "before the fever took her 3 winters ago." Reese nodded and set about making a simple meal of beans and corn bread from his stores. They ate in silence, Nora nearly falling asleep over her plate. "Rest now," he said, taking the dishes. "Tomorrow we'll talk about what's to be done." Nora looked at him with those remarkable green eyes, suddenly alert despite her exhaustion. "Why are you helping us? Truly? Men like Thornton have friends everywhere. Helping us could cost you everything." Reese considered his words carefully. "Some debts can't be measured in dollars, Miss Kincaid. Some are paid in kindness because someone once showed kindness to you." He gestured to the door. "Now get some sleep. Dawn comes early." As promised, Reese slept on the porch, wrapped in a blanket with his rifle across his lap. The night passed quietly, but his dreams were restless, filled with chains, frightened green eyes, and the memory of his own desperate flight years before. Morning came with the twitter of desert birds and the scent of sage carried on a gentle breeze. Reese was already awake, having risen before dawn to check his surroundings. No signs of pursuit yet, but that didn't mean they weren't being hunted. Inside the cabin, he found Nora awake and attempting to start the fire. Her hair was loosely braided, and despite the circumstances, she had an air of determined dignity that struck him. "Good morning," he said, setting down the rabbits he'd trapped at first light. "I see you're handy with a fire." "We weren't always in trouble," she replied, successfully coaxing flames from the kindling. "Before Father's gambling got worse, we had a good life. Mother made sure we knew how to manage a household." Maggie stirred on the bed, looking much improved despite the bruises that had darkened overnight. "Where are we?" she asked, her voice stronger than the previous day. While Reese prepared the rabbits for cooking, Nora explained everything to her sister. Maggie's reaction shifted from confusion to fear to cautious gratitude as she absorbed their situation. "So what happens now?" Maggie finally asked, looking between her sister and Reese. "Thornton will come looking. He always does." Reese nodded grimly. "Yes, he will, which is why you can't stay here long." "We don't want to bring trouble to your door," Nora said quickly. "Perhaps if you could take us to the nearest town." "Thornton owns the sheriff in Santa Rosa," Reese interrupted, "and has men watching the stage offices in both directions. Your best chance is to go west, maybe all the way to California." "With what?" Maggie asked bitterly. "They took everything, our home, our money, even Mother's locket." Reese remained silent as he continued preparing their meal, his mind working through possibilities. Finally, he spoke. "I have some savings," he said carefully. "Enough to get you both to California with a little left over to start fresh." The sisters exchanged looks of disbelief. "We couldn't possibly accept such charity," Nora said, though hope flickered in her eyes. "It's not charity," Reese replied firmly. "It's the right thing to do." After breakfast, while Maggie rested, Nora insisted on helping Reese with the morning chores. As they collected water from the creek, she studied him with open curiosity. "You're not like most men we've encountered out here," she observed. "You speak like you've had schooling, you have more books than I've seen outside a proper library, and you know medicine. Yet you live alone in this remote cabin. I wonder why." Reese smiled slightly. "Maybe I enjoy the quiet." "Or maybe you're hiding too," she suggested, her perception uncomfortably accurate. Before he could respond, the distant sound of hoofbeats reached them. Reese grabbed the water buckets with one hand and Nora's arm with the other, pulling her quickly back toward the cabin. "Inside now," he ordered, his voice low and urgent. "And stay away from the windows." 3 riders appeared on the ridge above the cabin, silhouetted against the morning sky. From their posture and the deliberate way they surveyed the area, Reese knew immediately they weren't casual travelers. Inside, he quickly retrieved his rifle and checked that it was loaded. Maggie was sitting up in bed, alarm evident on her face. "Is it them?" she whispered. "Likely Thornton's men," Reese confirmed. He reached under his bed and pulled out a wooden box from which he took a second revolver. He handed it to Nora. "Do you know how to use this?" "Father taught us," she said, checking the chambers with practiced movements that surprised him. "Good. If anything happens to me, take my horse and head northwest. There's a map in my saddlebag. Follow the creek until you reach the red rocks, then cut west. You'll find a Navajo settlement where a woman named Running Deer lives. Tell her Reese sent you. She'll help." Nora's fingers tightened around the gun. "Nothing's going to happen to you." The confidence in her voice warmed something in Reese's chest, but he had no time to dwell on it. The riders were approaching the cabin now, moving slowly, deliberately. "Stay inside," he said, and stepped onto the porch, rifle held casually but ready. The 3 men halted about 20 yards from the cabin. Their leader, a hard-faced man with a jagged scar across his chin, studied Reese with cold eyes. "Morning," the man called. "Name Sela's. We're looking for 2 women might have passed this way. Sisters." "Haven't seen any women in months," Reese replied evenly. "Just me out here." Sela's eyes narrowed. "Mind if we take a look inside your cabin, just to be sure?" "I mind considerably," Reese said, not moving from his position. "Private property and all." One of the other men spat tobacco juice into the dust. "Thornton's gonna be mighty interested to hear about a man living all alone who won't let folks take a friendly look around." "Thornton doesn't own this land," Reese stated. "Or me." The third rider, previously silent, suddenly pointed toward the clothesline at the side of the cabin where a woman's dress one Nora had washed earlier hung drying in the breeze. "That looked like your dress, mister," he sneered. Reese didn't flinch. "Belonged to my late wife. I keep it to remember her by." Silas laughed, an ugly sound. "A sentimental cowboy, now I've seen everything." His hand moved to rest on his holstered pistol. "Last chance to be reasonable." "You've had your answer," Reese replied, his voice hardening. "Now I suggest you ride on before this gets unfriendly." For a long moment, tension crackled in the air like static before a lightning strike. Then Silas slowly moved his hand away from his gun. "We'll be back," he promised, "with more men. Thornton wants those girls, and what Thornton wants, he gets." "Tell Thornton if he wants something from me, he should come himself," Reese said. "Now ride out." The men turned their horses, but not before Silas gave Reese a look that promised retribution. They rode slowly up the ridge, deliberately taking their time to demonstrate they weren't afraid. Only when they disappeared from view did Reese lower his rifle and return inside. He found the sisters standing together, Nora still holding the revolver, Maggie clutching a kitchen knife. "They'll be back," he said grimly, "and in greater numbers. We need to leave now." "Where will we go?" Maggie asked, her earlier confidence faltering. "First to the Navajo settlement I mentioned. From there, we can reach the Western Railroad in about 4 days' hard riding." Reese began gathering essential supplies. "We'll need to travel light and fast." "But you're home," Nora protested. "All your things are just things," he interrupted, "and this cabin has served its purpose." Within an hour, they had packed food, water, ammunition, and minimal personal items onto Reese's horse, and a second one he kept in a small corral behind the cabin. The sisters now wore clothing Reese had provided: simple men's trousers, shirts, and vests that would make riding easier and help disguise them from a distance. As they prepared to depart, Reese took one last look at the cabin he'd built with his own hands. 3 years of solitude, of healing, of hiding from his past, all ending in a single day because of 2 women with courage in their eyes and iron marks on their wrists. "Are you certain about this?" Nora asked quietly, watching his face. Reese turned to her, suddenly aware of how close she stood. "Some choices make themselves, Miss Kincaid." "Nora," she corrected him. "After all this, I think you can call me Nora." He nodded, something shifting in his chest. "Nora, then." They rode away from the cabin just as the sun reached its zenith, taking a route through rocky terrain where their tracks would be difficult to follow. Reese led the way, alert for signs of pursuit, while the sisters followed on the second horse, Maggie sitting behind Nora. The day stretched long and hot before them, the beginning of a journey that would test them all in ways none could yet imagine. They traveled until dusk, pushing the horses as much as they dared through the rugged landscape. Reese chose their path carefully, avoiding open spaces where they might be spotted. As shadows lengthened, he led them into a narrow canyon where a small spring provided water and the high walls offered protection. "We'll rest here tonight," he announced, helping the sisters dismount. Both women moved stiffly, unused to long hours in the saddle. "How far to this Navajo settlement?" Maggie asked, rubbing her lower back. "Another day's ride," Reese replied, unsaddling the horses. "If we keep up this pace and don't run into trouble." While Reese tended the horses, Nora gathered wood for a small, sheltered fire. He noticed how she moved with purpose despite her obvious exhaustion, her determination evident in every action. Maggie, though still weakened from her ordeal, insisted on helping by preparing a simple meal from their provisions. As night fell, they sat around the small fire, speaking in low voices. The spring gurgled softly nearby, and occasional desert sounds punctuated the darkness. "Tell us about running deer," Nora requested, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders against the desert night's chill. "How do you know her?" Reese was quiet for a moment, poking at the fire with a stick. "She saved my life," he finally said. "5 years ago, I was riding with a group of men working for the railroad. We were surveying routes through Navajo land." His expression darkened. "The men I was with, they weren't honorable. There was an incident with some Navajo women. I tried to stop it and took a knife in the back for my trouble." Nora's eyes widened, but she remained silent, letting him continue. "The men left me for dead. Running Deer found me, brought me to her people's healer. They had every reason to let me die, but they didn't. I spent 6 months with them, learning their ways, their medicine." He looked up at the stars. "When I was strong enough, I built that cabin and tried to live a life worthy of their mercy." "That explains the books on medicine," Maggie observed. "And the salve you gave us." Reese nodded. "Running Deer taught me that healing comes in many forms. Sometimes it's a poultice for a wound. Sometimes it's justice for those who can't fight for themselves." "Is that what this is?" Nora asked softly. "Justice?" "This," Reese said, meeting her gaze across the fire, "is keeping a promise I made to myself after being shown kindness I didn't deserve." The conversation lulled, each lost in their own thoughts. Eventually, Maggie fell asleep, her head resting on her folded arms. Nora moved to sit beside Reese, close enough that he could smell the faint scent of sage that clung to her borrowed clothes. "You never asked about our father," she said quietly. "About the debt that Thornton claimed." "Didn't seem important," Reese replied. "No debt justifies what was done to you." "Father was a dreamer," Nora continued, staring into the flames. "Always convinced the next scheme would be the one to make us rich. Mother's death broke something in him. He started drinking, gambling." She wrapped her arms around her knees. "When he lost our ranch to Thornton in a card game, he promised he could win it back. Instead, he lost more, including, apparently, his daughters." "Where is he now?" Reese asked gently. "Dead. Shot in a dispute over cards 3 weeks ago." Her voice was flat, emotionless. "Thornton came to the funeral. Said since father died without paying his debts, everything left, including Maggie and me, belonged to him now. When we refused to go with his men, they returned that night, took us by force." She looked at her wrists where the chain marks were still visible. "We fought. They decided to teach us a lesson by leaving us to die by the tracks." Reese felt a surge of anger at her story but kept his voice calm. "Thornton's a powerful man, but he's not above the law." Nora gave a bitter laugh. "In these territories, men like Thornton are the law." "Not everywhere," Reese countered. "There are still good people, good places. California has real courts, real justice." "Is that truly possible?" she asked, and the vulnerability in her voice struck him deeply. "Yes," he said with conviction. "I promise you it is." She studied his face in the firelight as if searching for deception. Finding none, she nodded slowly. "Then California it is," she whispered, and impulsively reached out to touch his hand. "Thank you, Reese, for everything." The simple contact sent unexpected warmth through him. Her fingers were slender but strong, marked with the calluses of someone who'd worked hard all her life. Without thinking, he turned his hand to clasp hers briefly. "Try to get some rest," he said, gently withdrawing. "I'll take first watch." As Nora settled beside her sister, Reese moved to the edge of their small camp, rifle across his knees. The night stretched before him, filled with unfamiliar thoughts of green eyes and brave hearts. The rising sun painted the canyon walls with gold when Reese gently woke the sisters. They'd passed an uneventful night, but he remained vigilant. Thornton's men would be searching, and they needed to reach the Navajo settlement before they were discovered. They ate quickly and broke camp, leaving minimal evidence of their presence. As they prepared to depart, Reese noticed Maggie studying the horizon with concern. "Smoke," she said, pointing northwest the direction they needed to travel. Reese followed her gaze and saw it too, a thin column of dark smoke rising against the morning sky, perhaps 5 miles distant. "Could be a campfire," he said, though his tone lacked conviction. "Or a signal," Nora suggested, "to let others know where to search for us." Reese considered their options. Going around would cost precious time, but heading directly toward potential danger was foolhardy. "We'll adjust course slightly east," he decided. "It will add a few hours, but better safe than walking into an ambush." The day proved punishing. The eastern route took them through rougher terrain with less shade and water. By midday, the sun beat down mercilessly, and both women were showing signs of strain despite their determination not to complain. During a brief stop to rest the horses, Reese shared his canteen with Nora, who drank gratefully. "How much farther?" she asked, passing the water to her sister. "We should reach the settlement by nightfall," he replied, scanning their back trail. "If we push hard." "We can push," Maggie assured him, though her face was flushed with heat. As they continued, Reese became increasingly concerned about their slow pace. The horses were tiring in the difficult terrain, and he'd spotted dust clouds to the south that might indicate riders. Late in the afternoon, disaster struck. Maggie's horse stepped into a hidden hole, stumbling badly. Though the animal didn't fall, the sudden movement caused Maggie to lose her balance. She slid sideways, crying out as she hit the ground. Reese was at her side instantly. "Don't move," he instructed, carefully examining her leg. "Can you feel this?" he asked, touching her ankle. "Yes," she winced. "It hurts, but I don't think it's broken." After a careful examination, Reese determined she had a bad sprain but no break. Still, she couldn't walk far and riding would be painful. "We'll have to slow down," he said grimly, fashioning a compress from his bandana and water. "No," Maggie protested. "They're behind us. I can see it in your face. If we slow down, they'll catch us." "We're not leaving you behind," Nora stated firmly. "And we're not all getting caught because of me," Maggie countered. She turned to Reese. "How far are we from your friend's settlement?" "About 3 hours' ride at our previous pace," he admitted. Maggie nodded decisively. "Then you two go ahead, bring back help." "Absolutely not," Nora protested. "It makes sense," Maggie insisted. "I'll hide. You can leave me water, the revolver. Go faster without me. Bring back help before dark." Reese considered the suggestion. It was risky leaving Maggie alone, but continuing together at a slow pace might doom them all. "There's a formation of rocks about half a mile east," he said, pointing. "Good shelter, defensive position if needed." "If we get you there, would you be all right for a few hours?" Despite Nora's continued objections, the logic of the plan eventually prevailed. They helped Maggie to the rocks, where a natural hollow created a sheltered space invisible from most angles. Reese left her with water, food, and the revolver, along with clear instructions about conserving ammunition if trouble appeared. "We'll be back before sunset," he promised. "Just stay hidden and rest that ankle." Maggie nodded bravely. "I'll be fine. Now go quickly." As they prepared to leave, Nora embraced her sister fiercely. "I'll come back for you, I swear it." "I know you will," Maggie replied. "Now go." And Nora, she glanced at Reese, then back to her sister. "Trust him." "I do." Riding double on Reese's horse, they made better time. Nora sat behind him, her arms wrapped around his waist for balance. The closeness was distracting, but Reese forced himself to focus on the terrain and potential threats. "She'll be all right," he said over his shoulder, feeling Nora's tension. "She has to be," Nora replied, her voice barely audible over the horse's hoofbeats. "She's all I have left." The words struck Reese deeply. He understood loss, understood being alone. Without thinking, he placed one hand over hers where it rested against his stomach. "Not anymore," he said simply, and felt her arms tighten briefly around him in response. They rode hard for nearly 2 hours, the landscape gradually changing as they approached Navajo territory. The red rocks became more prominent, the vegetation slightly different. Reese followed landmarks only he recognized, occasionally consulting the position of the sun. Finally, as the afternoon light began to soften toward evening, they crested a rise and Reese reined in the horse. "There," he said, pointing to a cluster of traditional hogans nestled in a protected valley below. Thin wisps of cooking smoke rose from several dwellings and figures moved about the settlement. "Will they help us?" Nora asked uncertainly. "Help Maggie." "Running Deer will," Reese said confidently, "and her word carries weight with the others." They approached slowly, Reese raising his hand in greeting when sentries appeared on the ridgeline. Words were called in Navajo, and Reese responded in the same language, his pronunciation careful but competent. The exchange seemed to satisfy the sentries, who motioned them forward. As they entered the settlement, curious eyes watched their approach. Children peeked from behind their mothers, and several men stood with arms crossed, their expressions wary but not hostile. A woman emerged from one of the larger hogans. She was perhaps 50, with streaks of gray in her long black hair and lines of wisdom around her eyes. She wore traditional dress adorned with intricate beadwork, and her bearing spoke of natural authority. "Running Deer," Reese said, dismounting and helping Nora down. He spoke briefly in Navajo, then switched to English. "This is Nora Kincaid. She and her sister need our help." Running Deer studied Nora intently, then nodded. "The one who healed you returned seeking healing for others. This is Balance." She gestured to several young men nearby. "Bring horses. The sister must be found before darkness." Reese quickly explained their situation. Running Deer listened without interruption, her expression hardening at the mention of Thornton. "This man has troubled our people as well," she said when he finished. "Taking land, poisoning water. The white man's law does nothing." "We need to reach California," Reese explained. "Get the sisters beyond his reach." Running Deer nodded. "First, we find the wounded one, then we will speak of what comes next." Within minutes, a rescue party was organized. Reese prepared to lead them back to Maggie, but Running Deer stopped him. "You stay," she said firmly. "You are tired, and there is something in your eyes when you look at this woman." She nodded toward Nora. "My son will lead the others. They will bring the sister safely." Reese wanted to protest but knew better than to argue with Running Deer. Her perception was legendary among her people. As the rescue party departed, Running Deer led them to her dwelling. Inside, it was cool and fragrant with herbs hanging from the ceiling. She gestured for them to sit on woven mats while she prepared tea. "You have traveled far in more ways than distance," she observed, handing them each a clay cup of steaming liquid. "The path ahead remains long." "Will your people help us reach the Western Railroad?" Reese asked. Running Deer smiled slightly. "Always in a hurry, White Wolf." It was the name she had given him during his recovery years before. "First, rest. Eat. Let your companions return with the sister. Then we will speak of tomorrow's journey." Under Running Deer's quiet authority, they found themselves relaxing for the first time in days. She provided food, a hearty stew of rabbit and wild vegetables, and fresh water for washing. To Nora, she gave a clean dress of soft deerskin. "This belonged to my daughter before she married and moved to her husband's people," Running Deer explained. "It will serve until your own clothes can be washed." Nora accepted the gift with genuine gratitude. "Your kindness to strangers is humbling." "You are not strangers," the older woman replied. "You travel with White Wolf, who carries our medicine in his hands and our teachings in his heart. That makes you family." As evening approached, Nora grew increasingly anxious about her sister. She stood at the entrance to the Hogan, watching the trail the rescue party had taken. Reese joined her, standing close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. "They'll find her," he assured her. "Running Deer's son is the best tracker in the territory." "I know," Nora said, though her hands twisted nervously together. "It's just Maggie's all I have, after everything we've been through." "I understand," Reese said quietly. "When you lose family, those who remain become even more precious." She turned to look at him, her green eyes searching his face. "You've lost people too." It wasn't a question, but he nodded anyway. "My parents to fever when I was young, my brother in the war, my wife and daughter to a raid 8 years ago." The simple recitation of losses caught in his throat, surprising him. He rarely spoke of his past, especially his family. "I'm so sorry," Nora whispered, impulsively touching his arm. "I shouldn't have asked." "You didn't," he said, "but perhaps it was time to say it aloud." He covered her hand with his own briefly. "After they died, I was lost for a long time. Did things I'm not proud of. Working for the railroad was part of that until I couldn't stomach it anymore and took that knife in the back." Before Nora could respond, shouts came from the sentries. The rescue party was returning. They hurried to meet them, Nora running ahead when she spotted her sister riding double with one of the Navajo men. Maggie looked tired but unharmed, her ankle wrapped skillfully in strips of cloth. "You came back," Maggie said as Nora helped her dismount. "Of course we did," Nora replied, embracing her sister tightly. "Always." Running Deer approached, examining Maggie's ankle with expert hands. "A bad sprain," she confirmed Reese's diagnosis, "but with proper care it will heal well." That night, the sisters shared a small guest hogan while Reese slept in Running Deer's dwelling. The settlement remained alert, with warriors stationed as sentries around the perimeter. If Thornton's men were tracking them, they would find more resistance than expected. In the morning, Running Deer called a council meeting. The elders gathered along with Reese and the sisters to discuss their situation. "Thornton's men will not stop searching," Running Deer stated. "They have been seen near our hunting grounds already." "We need to reach the railroad at Fort Wingate," Reese said. "From there they can take the train west." An elder named Stone Bear spoke up. "The direct path is watched. Thornton has men at the trading posts and water holes." "Then we need another route," Reese replied. "There is a way," Running Deer said slowly. "Through the high canyons. It is difficult, dangerous in places, but unknown to outsiders." "How long?" Reese asked. 5 days, perhaps 6 with the injured one, Stone Bear estimated. "But you cannot go alone. The path is easy to lose, and there are places where many hands are needed to pass." "I'll guide them," offered a young man Reese recognized as Swift Hawk, Running Deer's nephew. "I know the canyon paths well." Running Deer nodded approvingly. "It is decided then. You will leave tomorrow at first light. Today, we prepare." The day passed in a flurry of activity. The Navajo women helped repair and wash the sisters' clothing, while the men prepared supplies and discussed the route with Reese and Swift Hawk. Maggie's ankle was treated again with a poultice that noticeably reduced the swelling. In a quiet moment, Reese found Nora sitting outside, watching children play a game with stones and sticks. "How are you holding up?" he asked, sitting beside her. "Better than I expected," she admitted. "Your friends are remarkable people." "They are," he agreed. "I owe them everything." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment before Nora spoke again. "Last night you mentioned your wife and daughter. I'm sorry for bringing up painful memories." Reese looked at the distant mountains. "Catherine and Emma," he said softly. "It's been so long since I've spoken their names aloud." He paused. "Catherine was a schoolteacher. We met in St. Louis before I brought her west. Emma was 6 when they died." "What happened?" Nora asked gently. "If you don't mind telling me." "Comanche raid," he replied. "I was away, hunting. When I returned, the homestead was burning." His voice remained steady, though the memory still cut deep. "For a long time after, I was more ghost than man, drifting, drinking, looking for ways to die without actually pulling the trigger myself." "Yet here you are," Nora observed, "living, helping others. Running Deer says we each have a path. Mine led through darkness to her people, then to that cabin, and now here." He turned to look at her directly. "With you and your sister." Something passed between them in that moment, understanding, connection, possibility. Nora's hand moved to cover his where it rested on the ground between them. "I'm glad your path found ours," she said softly. Before he could respond, Running Deer approached. If she noticed their clasped hands, she gave no indication. "Come," she said. "There is much to discuss before tomorrow's journey." That evening, the community gathered for a meal that felt partly like a celebration and partly like a prayer for safe passage. Music was played on hand-carved flutes, and stories were shared in both Navajo and English. As the night deepened, Running Deer took Reese aside. "You have found something you thought lost," she observed. "I see it in your eyes." "I don't know what you mean," he replied, though he did. She smiled knowingly. "The heart cannot lie to one who knows how to look, White Wolf. You carry much pain, much guilt. Perhaps it is time to set down that burden." "Some burdens can't be put down," he said quietly. "All burdens can be shared," she countered. "That one," she nodded toward where Nora sat with her sister. "She has strength enough to carry her part." Before Reese could formulate a response, Running Deer pressed something into his hand, a small leather pouch on a cord. "For protection," she explained. "And for remembering who you truly are when darkness threatens." Reese accepted the gift with the proper formal thanks, knowing it contained sacred items that would help guide their journey. Such medicine bags were not given lightly. "Dawn comes early," Running Deer reminded him. "Sleep now, White Wolf. Tomorrow's path begins with the first step, not the 100th. As Reese prepared his bedroll that night, he found himself looking forward to the journey ahead despite its dangers. Something was awakening within him, something he had thought forever buried with Catherine and Emma. The realization brought both guilt and hope in equal measure. Morning arrived with a soft golden light, and the scent of sage on the breeze. The departure party assembled quickly. Reese, the sisters, Swift Hawk, and 2 other young Navajo men who would accompany them through the most difficult sections of the canyon route. Running Deer blessed their journey with sacred corn pollen and prayers. The entire settlement gathered to see them off, many offering small gifts or words of encouragement. Maggie's ankle had improved enough that she could ride on her own, though she would need help for any walking. The party had 5 horses total, 1 each for riding, plus a pack horse carrying supplies. As they prepared to depart, Nora approached Running Deer. "I don't know how to thank you for all you've done," she said sincerely. The older woman clasped Nora's hands in hers. "Live well. Be strong. Remember that family is found in many places." Her eyes flickered briefly toward Reese. "And perhaps someday, return to tell us your story." With final farewells exchanged, they rode out, Swift Hawk leading the way toward a narrow canyon entrance that was barely visible against the rock face. The path ahead would test them all, but for the first time since their rescue from the railroad tracks, there was genuine hope in the sisters' eyes. The canyon path proved as challenging as promised. Narrow in places, with steep ascents and descents that required dismounting and leading the horses carefully. Swift Hawk moved confidently, pointing out handholds and secure footing with the ease of someone who had traveled this route many times. By midday, they had entered a maze of interconnected canyons, the high walls providing shade but also creating an unsettling sense of enclosure. The only sounds were the horses' hooves on stone, the occasional call of a hawk overhead, and the whisper of wind through narrow passages. "How do you not get lost in here?" Maggie asked Swift Hawk during a brief rest stop. The young man smiled. "The stones speak if you know how to listen. Each turn, each rise has its own story." He pointed to subtle markings on the canyon walls. "And sometimes, our ancestors left signs for those who follow." Reese noticed how Nora absorbed everything: the route, the markings, the techniques for guiding horses through difficult terrain. Her quick mind and adaptability impressed him more with each passing hour. As the day progressed, the canyons occasionally opened into hidden valleys lush with unexpected vegetation, secret oases fed by underground springs. At one such place, they stopped to rest the horses and refill water skins. While the others tended the animals, Reese found Nora standing beside a small waterfall that emerged mysteriously from the rock face. "It's beautiful," she said as he approached. "How can such life exist in the middle of all this stone and desert?" "The water finds a way," Reese replied, watching how the sunlight caught in her hair. "It always does." She turned to face him, her expression thoughtful. "Like people, I suppose, finding paths through impossible places." "Some better than others," he acknowledged. "You found us," she said simply, "when no one else would have looked." The gratitude in her voice made him uncomfortable. "I just happened to be riding that way." "No," Nora shook her head. "Running Deer says there are no accidents on our path. I believe her." She hesitated, then added softly, "I'm glad your path crossed ours, Reese Faulkner." The sound of his full name on her lips startled him. He hadn't told her his surname. Seeing his surprise, she smiled slightly. "Maggie heard Running Deer call you by your full name when they were treating her ankle. I hope you don't mind that I used it." "No," he said. "I don't mind." Something shifted between them in that moment, a barrier falling away, leaving space for new possibilities. Before either could speak again, Swift Hawk called that it was time to continue. They made camp that evening in a protected hollow, where signs of previous Navajo camps were evident. As darkness fell, Swift Hawk explained they were now deep in the canyon network, following a route known only to his people. "No white man has traveled this way," he said as they sat around a small fire. "Thornton's men could not follow even if they knew where to look." "How much farther to Fort Wingate?" Reese asked. "4 days if the weather holds," Swift Hawk replied. "3 if we push hard, but that would be difficult for the injured one." He nodded respectfully toward Maggie. "I can keep up," Maggie insisted. "My ankle is much better with Running Deer's medicine." They discussed watches for the night, with Reese taking first shift. As the others settled for sleep, Nora approached him where he sat on a rock overlooking their camp. "Mind if I join you?" she asked. "I'm not ready to sleep yet." He moved over, making space for her. They sat in comfortable silence for a time, watching the stars emerge in the narrow strip of sky visible between the canyon walls. "What will you do?" she finally asked. "After we reach California, I mean." The question caught him off guard. He hadn't thought beyond getting the sisters safely away from Thornton. "I'm not sure," he admitted. "My cabin's likely not safe to return to, not with Thornton looking for me now, too." "You could come with us," Nora suggested hesitantly. "To California." The idea was both appealing and terrifying. "And do what?" "Whatever you want," she said. "Start fresh. Isn't that what you helped us do?" Reese considered her words. California was far from his past, far from the ghosts that had kept him company for so long. But moving forward meant leaving behind more than just a cabin. "I'll think about it," he said finally. Nora nodded, seeming to understand the weight of his consideration. After another comfortable silence, she spoke again. "Tell me something good," she requested. "Something from before." "Everything." Reese thought for a moment, then smiled slightly. "My daughter Emma loved butterflies. She would sit absolutely still for hours if she thought one might land on her. She had this theory that they could understand her if she whispered very softly." Nora's smile was gentle. "She sounds wonderful." "She was," Reese agreed. "Like her mother, stubborn, bright, saw the good in everything." He paused. "Your turn. Something good from before." Nora leaned back, looking up at the stars. "When I was 12, my father built Maggie and me a tree house in this huge oak behind our first homestead. Mother said it was too dangerous, but he insisted every child needed a secret place." Her voice grew warm with the memory. "We spent entire summers up there, reading books, making up stories, watching the world below. It was our kingdom." "You were close to him," Reese observed, "despite his flaws." "He wasn't always as you found us," she said softly. "Before the drinking, before the gambling, he was a good father. Taught us to ride, to shoot, to stand up for ourselves. He just lost his way after Mother died." "People often do," Reese said, thinking of his own dark years. "But some find it again," Nora replied, her eyes meeting his in the darkness. The moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken understanding. Finally, Reese cleared his throat. "You should get some rest," he said. "Tomorrow will be another long day." Nora nodded and stood. "Good night, Reese." "Good night, Nora." As she walked away, Reese felt something he hadn't experienced in years, a sense of possibility, of future, of doors opening rather than closing. It was both exhilarating and terrifying. The next 2 days followed a similar pattern, challenging travel through the canyon labyrinth. Brief rests in hidden valleys, and careful progress toward their destination. Swift Hawk proved an exceptional guide, finding paths where none seemed to exist and keeping their group moving steadily westward. On the 3rd day, however, their luck changed. Dark clouds gathered by mid-morning, and the wind picked up, carrying the unmistakable scent of rain. "Flash floods," Swift Hawk said grimly, studying the sky. "We need higher ground." They altered course, heading for an elevated area Swift Hawk knew. The rain began just as they reached it, a plateau with a shallow cave that offered some shelter. Within minutes, the shower turned into a downpour, water cascading down the canyon walls and gathering in the passages they had just traversed. "We're safe here," Swift Hawk assured them as they huddled in the cave. "But we cannot continue until the water recedes." Lightning flashed, followed by thunder that echoed through the canyons like artillery fire. The horses grew restless, requiring constant attention to keep them calm. As the storm intensified, Reese noticed Maggie wincing as she shifted position. "Your ankle," he asked. "The damp makes it ache," she admitted, "but I'm fine." Nora immediately moved to her sister's side, helping her elevate the injured limb. "Let me see," she insisted, unwrapping the bandages. The ankle was swollen again, the skin around it discolored. Reese examined it carefully. "The riding has aggravated it," he concluded. "You need to stay off it completely for a while." "We don't have a while," Maggie protested. Thornton isn't following us through this," Reese interrupted, gesturing to the torrential rain creating waterfalls down the canyon walls. "We have time to let you heal properly," Swift Hawk agreed. "The storm will last through the night. We stay here until morning at least." Despite Maggie's objections, the decision was made. They would rest at the plateau until the storm passed and her ankle improved. Reese used some of Running Deer's medicine to create a fresh poultice, while Nora made her sister as comfortable as possible with their limited supplies. As evening approached, the rain continued unabated. The men constructed a windbreak at the cave entrance using branches and canvas from their packs. Inside, they built a small fire, careful to direct the smoke outward. The enforced rest created an unexpected opportunity for conversation. As they shared their simple dinner, Swift Hawk told stories of his people, legends of the canyons, tales of his ancestors, histories that had never been written in any book. In return, Maggie shared stories of the sisters' childhood in Kansas before their family moved west. Her natural gift for storytelling soon had everyone laughing at tales of their youthful misadventures. "Your turn," Nora eventually said to Reese. "Tell us something from your travels." Put on the spot, Reese hesitated, then decided to share a lighter memory. "When I first came west before I met Catherine, I worked as a horse trainer for a wealthy rancher in Colorado. He had this stallion, meanest creature I'd ever encountered. No one could get near him." "Except you," Maggie guessed. Reese laughed. "Except his daughter's cat. This tiny calico would wander into the corral, and that 1,000-pound demon of a horse would follow it around like a puppy. The rancher offered me $50 if I could ride him. I spent weeks trying every trick I knew." "Did you succeed?" Swift Hawk asked, clearly invested in the story. "In a manner of speaking," Reese admitted. "I borrowed the cat, put it in a basket on the saddle. That horse stood perfectly still while I mounted and walked around gentle as could be as long as his feline friend was present." Their laughter filled the small cave, creating a moment of warmth and connection that defied the storm raging outside. Even the usually stoic Navajo guides joined in the mirth. As the evening progressed, Swift Hawk and his companions moved deeper into the cave to sleep, leaving Reese and the sisters near the fire. Maggie soon dozed off, exhausted from the day's journey and her injury. In the flickering firelight, Nora studied Reese's face. "You don't tell many stories about yourself, do you?" "Not much practice," he admitted. "Been alone a long time." "By choice or circumstance?" she asked. "Both, I suppose," he replied, adding wood to the fire. "After losing my family, being around others just reminded me of what was gone." Nora nodded, understanding. "After Mother died, I wanted to run away, just take Maggie and start somewhere new, but Father needed us, even when he didn't realize it." "You're very loyal," Reese observed. "It's a rare quality." "So is courage," she countered. "Like cutting chains off strangers and risking everything to help them." He shook his head slightly. "That wasn't courage, just human decency." "In my experience," Nora said softly, "they're often the same thing." The rain provided a steady backdrop to their conversation, creating a sense of isolation that made confidences easier to share. As the fire burned low, Nora moved closer to Reese, close enough that their shoulders touched. "California," she said thoughtfully. "It seems impossible that we might actually reach it." "We will," Reese assured her. "Swift Hawk knows what he's doing and we're making good time despite the delay." "And then?" she asked, her voice barely audible above the rain. Reese turned to look at her, finding her face inches from his own. "And then you'll be safe, free to build whatever life you choose." "What about you?" Her eyes searched his in the dim light. "What life will you choose?" The question hung between them, laden with implications neither was quite ready to voice. Before Reese could respond, a particularly loud thunderclap startled them both, breaking the moment. "We should get some rest," he said, moving back slightly. "Storm or not, we'll need to be ready to travel tomorrow." Nora nodded, disappointment briefly visible in her expression before she schooled her features. "Good night, Reese." "Good night, Nora." As she settled beside her sister, Reese remained by the fire, watching the rain and contemplating choices he had not allowed himself to consider for many years. Morning brought clear skies and the aftermath of the storm, rushing water in the canyon bottoms. freshened air, and renewed vigor in the desert plant life. Swift Hawk scouted their route and reported that while some passages were now impassable, he knew alternate paths. Maggie's ankle had improved significantly with the rest and treatment. Though she still needed help mounting her horse, she insisted she was ready to continue. They set out mid-morning, following Swift Hawk through a series of switchbacks that took them higher into the canyon system. The scenery grew increasingly dramatic, towering red rock formations, natural arches, and expansive views when they reached higher elevations. 2 more days to Fort Wingate, Swift Hawk announced as they stopped for a midday meal. Maybe less if the water recedes quickly. The news heartened everyone. They had traveled for nearly 4 days without sign of pursuit, and the prospect of reaching civilization and the railroad renewed their determination. As they prepared to continue, one of Swift Hawk's companions, who had climbed to a higher vantage point, signaled urgently. Swift Hawk joined him, then returned to the group with a troubled expression. "Riders," he reported, "far to the south, following the outer canyon rim. Thornton's men." Reese asked, immediately alert. "Cannot tell from this distance," Swift Hawk replied, "but they are white men armed, 6, maybe 7. "Could they be military?" Nora suggested hopefully. "From the fort," Swift Hawk shook his head, "they do not move like soldiers, more like hunters." Reese considered their options. Can they access this inner canyon system? There are ways if they know them, Swift Hawk admitted, but few white men do. We should keep moving, Reese decided. Stay ahead of them, reach the fort as quickly as possible. They pressed on at a faster pace, Swift Hawk choosing routes that kept them below the rim and out of sight when possible. By late afternoon, they had made excellent progress, but the horses were tiring, and Maggie was clearly in pain despite her efforts to hide it. They made camp earlier than usual in a protected ravine. While the others prepared the site, Reese and Swift Hawk climbed to scout their back trail. "No sign of them," Swift Hawk reported after scanning the landscape with Reese's field glasses. "Perhaps they were just travelers." "Perhaps," Reese agreed, though his instincts told him otherwise. "Double the watches tonight, just in case." As darkness fell, the mood in camp was subdued. The knowledge that they might be pursued cast a shadow over their earlier optimism. Maggie tried to lighten the atmosphere with stories, but eventually fell silent, her ankle throbbing despite Nora's ministrations. During his watch, Reese heard soft footsteps approaching. Nora appeared beside him, wrapped in a blanket against the night chill. "Couldn't sleep," she explained, settling beside him on the rocky outcrop that served as their lookout point. "Worried about the riders?" he asked. "Among other things," she admitted. She was quiet for a moment before continuing. "Reese, if something happens, if Thornton's men find us, I want you to take Maggie and go. Leave me behind." "Not a chance," he replied immediately. "I mean it," she insisted. "Maggie's injured. She needs protection more than I do. Promise me you'll get her safely to California no matter what." Reese turned to face her fully. "Nothing is going to happen to either of you, not while I'm breathing." The conviction in his voice seemed to reach something deep within her. In the silver moonlight, he could see tears forming in her eyes. "Why?" she whispered. "Why risk so much for us? For me?" The question demanded honesty he hadn't offered anyone in years. "Because when I found you by those tracks," he said slowly, "something changed. After Catherine and Emma died, I stopped living, just existed day to day. But seeing you there, fighting despite everything." He struggled to find the right words. "It reminded me that courage isn't just facing danger. Sometimes it's continuing to hope when there's no reason to." Nora's hand found his in the darkness. "And now?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "Now I'm remembering what it feels like to have something worth fighting for," he admitted. "Something worth living for." The moment crystallized between them, fragile, precious, unexpected. Nora leaned forward slowly, giving him time to pull away if he wished. When he didn't, her lips met his in a kiss that began tentatively but quickly deepened with shared emotion. When they finally parted, Reese rested his forehead against hers. "I thought this part of me was dead," he confessed. "I'm glad it isn't," she replied, her fingers gently touching his face. "For both our sakes." They remained together through his watch, sometimes talking softly, sometimes simply existing in a shared silence that required no words. When Swift Hawk came to relieve him, Reese walked Nora back to her sleeping area. "Get some rest," he said, reluctant to leave her side. She nodded but held his hand a moment longer. "Reese, I meant what I said about California, about you coming with us." He squeezed her hand gently. "I know, and I'm starting to think I might have a reason to." Dawn broke with renewed urgency. Swift Hawk reported fresh signs that others had entered the canyon system: broken branches, disturbed stones, a campfire less than 5 miles behind them. "They know these paths," he said grimly. "Someone is guiding them." "How far to the fort?" Reese asked, helping Maggie onto her horse. "A full day's ride at our best pace," Swift Hawk replied. "Less if we take the narrow way, but that is dangerous even in good conditions." "What's the narrow way?" Nora asked, tightening her saddle straps. "A passage that cuts directly through the mesa," Swift Hawk explained. "Very narrow in places, barely wide enough for a horse. One mistake means a fall of many hundred feet, but it saves half a day's travel." They debated briefly, but the decision was clear. With pursuers closing in, they needed every advantage. They would take the narrow way. The morning's ride was grueling. Swift Hawk set a pace that pushed both humans and horses to their limits, following routes that grew increasingly vertical and challenging. By midday, they had climbed significantly higher than their previous path, the air noticeably thinner at the elevation. When they stopped briefly to rest the horses, Swift Hawk pointed ahead to a dark line cutting through a massive mesa. "The narrow way begins there. Once we enter, there is no turning back until we reach the other side." As they approached the entrance to the passage, Reese felt a growing sense of both awe and trepidation. The narrow way was aptly named, a crevice slicing through solid rock, creating a path that seemed to have been carved by some giant blade. The walls rose hundreds of feet on either side, and in places, the gap was indeed barely wider than a horse. "We go single file," Swift Hawk instructed. "I lead. My brothers will take the rear. Keep your horses calm and centered. Look forward, not down." Nora caught Reese's eye as they prepared to enter. "Together?" she asked simply. "Together," he confirmed, drawing strength from her steady gaze. The passage began relatively wide, allowing them to adjust to the confining space. But soon it narrowed dramatically, forcing them to focus entirely on careful progress. The footing was treacherous in places, loose gravel over solid rock, occasional steps up or down that required the horses to navigate carefully. Maggie, despite her injury, handled the challenge with remarkable composure. When Reese glanced back to check on her, she gave him a determined nod, her hands steady on the reins. They had traveled perhaps halfway through the passage when Swift Hawk raised his hand for a halt. Everyone froze, the only sounds their breathing and the occasional shifting of the horses' hooves. Then they all heard it, voices echoing from the entrance they had used. The distant but unmistakable sound of men and horses entering the narrow way behind them. "They're following us in," Reese said quietly. Swift Hawk nodded grimly. "We must reach the exit before they catch us. In this place there is nowhere to hide, nowhere to fight." They resumed their careful progress, moving as quickly as safety allowed. The passage twisted and turned. sometimes widening enough to offer brief relief, other times narrowing so severely they had to dismount and lead the horses through one by one. The voices behind them grew gradually louder, despite their best efforts to outpace their pursuers. Whoever was tracking them knew this route well and was moving with confidence. Finally, after what seemed like endless careful steps along the precipitous path, Swift Hawk signaled that the exit was just ahead. As they rounded a final bend, light flooded the passage, revealing an opening that led to an expansive plateau beyond. They emerged into bright sunlight, the vast landscape of the high desert spreading before them. In the distance, perhaps 10 miles away, they could see the faint outlines of Fort Wingate. "We're close," Reese said with relief, helping Maggie dismount so her horse could rest briefly. "But not safe yet," Swift Hawk reminded them, looking back toward the passage. "They still follow." As if to confirm his words, a shout echoed from the narrow way much closer than expected. Their pursuers had gained ground significantly. "We need to keep moving," Reese urged, helping Maggie back onto her horse. "If we can reach the fort by nightfall," a rifle shot cracked through the air, the bullet striking rock near Swift Hawk's head. Everyone instinctively ducked, scanning for the source. A man stood at the exit of the narrow way, rifle raised for another shot. Behind him, others were emerging. "Thornton's men," Nora confirmed, her face pale but determined. Reese made a split-second decision. "Swift Hawk, take the sisters and ride for the fort. Don't stop for anything." "What about you?" Nora demanded, already knowing his answer. "I'll slow them down," he said, checking his rifle. "Give you time to reach safety." "No," Nora protested. "We stay together." Another shot rang out, closer this time. The horses danced nervously. "There's no time to argue," Reese insisted. "Get to the fort. I'll be right behind you." Swift Hawk understood the necessity. "Come," he said to the sisters. "We must go now." Maggie, tears in her eyes, nodded reluctantly, but Nora remained frozen, her gaze locked with Reese's. "I won't leave you," she said firmly. "You have to," he replied, stepping closer to take her hand. "For Maggie, for everything we've fought for." In that moment, with danger closing in and time running out, he kissed her briefly but with all the emotion he couldn't put into words. "I will find you," he promised. "Now go." Something in his voice, in his eyes, finally convinced her. With a nod, she turned her horse and followed Swift Hawk, who had already started across the plateau with Maggie. Reese watched them for a moment, then took position behind a large boulder, rifle ready. As Thornton's men fully emerged from the passage, he opened fire, not aiming to kill, but to slow them down, to make them take cover and waste precious minutes. The strategy worked. The pursuers scattered, finding what protection they could on the relatively exposed terrain. A firefight ensued, with Reese carefully conserving ammunition while keeping them pinned down. From his position, he could see the sisters and their Navajo guides growing smaller in the distance. They were riding hard for the fort, making good time across the open ground. Relief flooded through him. They would make it. That moment of distraction cost him. A bullet grazed his arm, the sudden pain causing him to drop behind the boulder. Blood seeped through his shirt sleeve, but the wound wasn't serious, just enough to remind him of his vulnerability. The standoff continued for nearly an hour, with sporadic exchanges of gunfire. Reese knew he couldn't hold them indefinitely. His ammunition was limited, and they would eventually work out a way to flank his position. When the shooting from the other side paused, a voice called out. "We know who you are, Faulkner. Thornton's offering $1,000 for those girls and $500 for the man who took them." Reese didn't respond, using the lull to check how far the sisters had traveled. They were nearly out of sight now, approaching a line of trees that would provide additional cover. "You can't win this," the voice continued. "There are 7 of us and one of you. Be reasonable." "Come and get me then," Reese shouted back, firing a shot to emphasize his defiance. The exchange resumed, more intense than before. Reese could tell they were trying to move to better positions, working their way around to trap him. He needed to move soon or be surrounded. Taking advantage of a momentary lull, he scrambled to a new position behind a fallen tree trunk about 30 yards back from his original location. The movement drew immediate fire, but he reached cover safely. From this new vantage point, he could see that the sisters and Swift Hawk had disappeared from view entirely. They had reached the trees and were now well on their way to the fort. A profound sense of satisfaction filled him. Whatever happened now, he had succeeded in his most important task. The realization brought clarity and renewed purpose. He wasn't fighting just to delay anymore. He was fighting for his own future, a future that suddenly seemed worth having. With determined focus, Reese continued the battle of wits and bullets with Thornton's men. He changed positions repeatedly, creating the impression of multiple defenders. His knowledge of combat tactics from his military days served him well, allowing him to maximize his effectiveness despite being vastly outnumbered. As the afternoon wore on, he noticed a change in the pattern of fire from his opponents. They seemed to be consolidating rather than spreading out. Then he heard distant bugle calls from the direction of the fort. The cavalry was coming. Swift Hawk and the sisters must have reached Fort Wingate and raised the alarm. Relief surged through Reese, though he knew the danger wasn't past. Thornton's men would hear the bugles too and realize their time was running out. That made them more dangerous, not less. Desperate men took desperate risks. His suspicion proved correct. Instead of retreating, they launched a coordinated rush toward his position, firing as they advanced. Reese responded with careful, measured shots, dropping one man with a wound to the leg, another with a hit to the shoulder. But they kept coming, and his ammunition was nearly exhausted. Just as they were about to overrun his position, the thunder of hooves announced the arrival of blue uniformed cavalry soldiers cresting a nearby rise. Thornton's men scattered, some firing parting shots, others simply running for their horses. The cavalry gave chase, cutting off their retreat back through the narrow way. As the skirmish concluded, Reese emerged from cover, his arm throbbing but his spirit lighter than it had been in years. A familiar figure rode toward him, Nora, alongside a cavalry lieutenant. "You came back," he said as she dismounted and ran to him. "Of course I did," she replied, embracing him fiercely despite his dusty, bloodied state. "Always." The aftermath unfolded with surprising swiftness. Fort Wingate's commander, Colonel Harrison, was an old-fashioned man with clear notions of right and wrong. After hearing the sisters' story confirmed by Swift Hawk and corroborated by evidence found on the captured members of Thornton's gang, he dispatched a full company to arrest Clayton Thornton. "The law moves slowly out here," the colonel explained as they sat in his office the following day. "But it does move. Kidnapping, attempted murder, illegal imprisonment, these aren't things even Thornton can buy his way out of." Reese's wound had been properly treated by the fort's doctor, and both sisters had been given quarters in the officers' wives section of the fort. For the first time in over a week, they all enjoyed the luxury of proper beds, hot meals, and safety. "What about our journey west?" Maggie asked, her ankle now properly bandaged and on its way to healing. "We still intend to reach California. The westbound train arrives tomorrow," Colonel Harrison informed them. "I've taken the liberty of arranging passage for you both." He glanced at Reese. "And for Mr. Faulkner, if he wishes to accompany you." All eyes turned to Reese, who had been unusually quiet during the meeting. "I need to speak with Swift Hawk and his companions first," he said. "Make sure they're properly thanked for their help." The colonel nodded, understanding. "Of course. They've been given honorary status as scouts for the fort. Captain Williams is quite impressed with their knowledge of the territory." After the meeting, Reese found Swift Hawk near the fort's stables, preparing to return to his people. "You are not coming with us?" the young Navajo asked, though his expression suggested he already knew the answer. "My path leads elsewhere now," Reese replied, offering a pouch of tobacco as a parting gift. "Please convey my deepest gratitude to Running Deer and your people." Swift Hawk accepted the tobacco with proper ceremony. "She knew, I think, Running Deer. When she gave you the medicine bag, she said you would find your way home." He glanced toward the officers' quarters where Nora could be seen talking with her sister. "Perhaps she meant a different kind of home than we thought." Reese followed his gaze, a warmth spreading through his chest at the sight of Nora laughing in the sunlight. "Perhaps she did." They clasped arms in farewell, the bond formed through their journey transcending the cultural differences between them. "If you ever need sanctuary," Swift Hawk said, "our people will welcome White Wolf and his family." The word family lingered in Reese's mind as he watched his friend ride away with his companions. It had been so long since he'd allowed himself to think in such terms, to consider a future that included more than just survival. That evening, he found Nora sitting alone on the fort's western wall, watching the sunset paint the desert in shades of gold and crimson. He joined her silently, content simply to be in her presence. "Maggie's ankle is much improved," she said after a while. "The doctor says she'll be able to walk normally in another week or so." "That's good news," Reese replied. "The colonel says Thornton was arrested this morning," she continued. "They found evidence at his ranch linking him to numerous crimes beyond what he did to us." "Justice has a way of finding people eventually," Reese observed. They fell silent again, the vastness of the landscape before them encouraging contemplation rather than speech. Finally, Nora turned to face him directly. "You haven't said if you're coming with us tomorrow," she said, her voice steady despite the vulnerability in her eyes. Reese looked out at the horizon once more, then back to her. "For a long time, I've been running from ghosts," he said slowly. "Living half a life because I felt I didn't deserve a whole one after failing to protect my family." Nora listened silently, her gaze never leaving his face. "When I found you and Maggie by those tracks," he continued, "something changed. Cutting those chains wasn't just about freeing you, it was about freeing myself too. I just didn't realize it then." He took her hand, his calloused fingers entwining with hers. "So yes, I'm coming with you to California, if you'll have me." The joy that bloomed in Nora's expression was answer enough, but she spoke the words anyway. "I can't imagine going without you." As the last light faded from the sky, they remained together on the wall, speaking of possibilities and plans, of hopes and new beginnings. For the first time in years, Reese allowed himself to envision a future one filled with purpose and, just maybe, happiness. The westbound train departed Fort Wingate the next afternoon, steam billowing as it prepared for the long journey to California. On the platform, final goodbyes were exchanged with Colonel Harrison and the other officers who had assisted them. "You'll find the law more established in California," the colonel advised. "But still, keep your wits about you. The West remains wild in many places." "We will," Reese assured him, shaking his hand in farewell. As they boarded the train, Maggie went ahead to secure their seats, giving Reese and Nora a moment alone on the steps of the passenger car. "Ready?" he asked, offering his hand to help her aboard. Nora looked back at the fort, at the vast New Mexico landscape beyond, then at Reese's face. "I think I've been ready since the moment you cut those chains," she said, taking his hand. The train whistle blew, and with a lurch, they began moving westward. Inside the passenger car, they found Maggie already engaged in conversation with an elderly couple traveling to visit their son in San Francisco. As the train gathered speed, Nora gazed out the window at the passing scenery. "It doesn't seem real yet," she confessed. "Being free, heading to a new life." "It's real," Reese assured her, taking her hand beneath the cover of her skirts. "We're making it real together." The journey to California took nearly a week, with stops in small towns and larger cities along the way. At each station, Reese remained vigilant, but there was no sign of trouble. News traveled quickly in the territories, and word of Thornton's arrest had likely spread, diminishing any threat from his remaining associates. During the long hours on the train, they discussed their plans. San Francisco was their destination, a city big enough to offer opportunities and far enough from their past to provide a fresh start. "I have skills beyond just ranching," Reese explained. "Carpentry, blacksmithing. There's always work for men who can build things." "And I can teach," Nora added. "Mother ensured we had proper education, even on the frontier, or perhaps open a small shop." "I could work with horses," Maggie suggested, her natural affinity for the animals evident in how quickly she had bonded with their mounts during their journey. "Or in a hotel." "I've always been good with people." They spun possibilities like gold thread, weaving a future from hope and determination. As the landscape outside the window changed from desert to mountains to the lush valleys of California, their plans became more concrete, more real. On their final night before reaching San Francisco, as Maggie slept in the seat across from them, Reese turned to Nora with uncharacteristic hesitation. "There's something I need to ask you," he said quietly. "Something I've been thinking about since Fort Wingate." Nora's eyes widened slightly at his serious tone. "What is it?" "I know it's fast," he began, "considering everything that's happened. But out here, life moves at its own pace." He took a deep breath. "Nora Kincaid, when we reach San Francisco, would you consider becoming my wife?" Joy bloomed across her face, radiant even in the dim light of the train car. "Yes," she whispered. 1,000 times yes." Their kiss was gentle, mindful of their sleeping companion and fellow passengers, but filled with promise and certainty that transcended their surroundings. "We should tell Maggie in the morning," Nora said when they parted. "She'll be so happy. She already thinks of you as family." Reese smiled, the weight of years of solitude and grief finally lifting from his shoulders. "Family," he repeated softly. "I like the sound of that." San Francisco greeted them with fog and the constant clamor of a city growing faster than anyone could have imagined. The gold rush might have ended, but opportunity still drew thousands to California's shores. With the money Reese had saved, supplemented by a reward Colonel Harrison had arranged for their help in capturing Thornton and his gang, they secured modest lodgings in a respectable neighborhood. Within days, Reese found work with a construction company building homes for the city's expanding population. Nora, with her education and quick mind, secured a position as a teacher's assistant at a local school, with promise of advancement once she proved herself. Maggie, her ankle now fully healed, found employment at a fashionable hotel, her natural charm and efficiency quickly making her indispensable. 6 weeks after their arrival, on a clear autumn day with the bay sparkling in the distance, Reese and Nora were married in a simple ceremony attended by Maggie and a few new friends. The pastor was a kind man who asked few questions about their past, focusing instead on their future together. "You may kiss your bride," he announced after they had exchanged vows and simple gold bands. As Reese leaned in to kiss his new wife, memories of their journey flashed through his mind: the railroad tracks where he'd first found her, the desperate flight through the canyons, the moment he'd realized he couldn't imagine life without her. Each step, each decision had led to this moment, this beginning. Their reception was held in the garden behind their rented house, with food and music and laughter that continued well into the evening. As twilight fell, Reese found Nora standing alone, looking at the first stars appearing in the sky. "Happy?" he asked, slipping his arm around her waist. "More than I ever thought possible," she replied, leaning into his embrace. "When I think of where we were just months ago." "Best not to dwell too much on the past," he suggested gently. "We have the present, and the future." She turned in his arms to face him. "A future that once seemed impossible. Sometimes I still expect to wake up and find myself back in that nightmare." "This is real," he assured her, touching her face. "We're real." Later that night, as they stood alone in the bedroom of their small house, the reality of their new life together fully dawned on them both. With tender care, they discovered each other, healing old wounds with new love, replacing painful memories with joyful ones. "I love you, Reese Faulkner," Nora whispered in the darkness. "From the moment you cut those chains, I think I've loved you." "And I love you," he replied, holding her close. "More than I thought possible after so much loss." In the years that followed, their life together unfolded with both challenges and triumphs. Reese's skills as a builder eventually allowed him to start his own small company, specializing in homes designed to withstand California's occasional earthquakes. Nora became a full teacher and later opened a small school of her own, focusing on educating girls who might otherwise have limited opportunities. Maggie, always independent, eventually opened a successful boarding house for respectable working women, providing safe, affordable lodging that was perpetually in demand in the growing city. 3 years after their wedding, Nora gave birth to twins: a boy they named Samuel after her father, and a girl they called Emma, after Reese's lost daughter. The children grew strong and curious, surrounded by love and the stories of their parents' extraordinary journey. On the twins' 5th birthday, as the family celebrated in their garden, now part of a proper house Reese had built with his own hands, he found Nora watching the children with a contemplative expression. "What are you thinking?" he asked, sitting beside her on the bench beneath the apple tree he'd planted when they first moved in. "About chains," she replied, surprising him, "and how sometimes the things that seem like the end are actually beginnings in disguise." He took her hand, running his thumb over the simple gold band on her finger. "Beginnings and endings all mixed together. If Thornton's men hadn't left us by those tracks," she mused, "if you hadn't ridden by at that exact moment." "But I did," he said simply, "and here we are." They watched their children playing with the wooden horses Reese had carved for them, Samuel galloping in circles while Emma instructed her mount to be gentle, in a voice so like her mother's it made Reese smile. "You ever regret it?" Nora asked suddenly. "Stopping that day? All the danger it brought you?" Reese considered the question seriously, then shook his head. "Not for a single moment. Some choices define a life, Nora. Cutting those chains defined mine in the best possible way." She leaned against his shoulder, contentment radiating from her. "Ours," she corrected gently. "It defined ours." As the California sunset painted the sky in hues of gold and crimson, the Faulkner family gathered together: Reese and Nora, the twins, Maggie and her fiancé, a kind-hearted banker she'd met through her business. Their path from those desperate moments beside the railroad tracks to this peaceful garden had been neither straight nor easy, but it had led them home. And in the end, that made every step worth taking.